Section 5, Continuous Integration and Continuous Delivery. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the breakdown of CI and CD for containers. When we talk about the continuous integration and continuous delivery of containers, specifically as it relates to deploying containers to a Kubernetes cluster, there are a few things that we want to cover. One is an end-to-end overview of what a pipeline may look like from perspective of continuous integration as well as continuous delivery. We're going to talk through the use of image registries. Most folks who are familiar with Docker are familiar with the public registry, which is where you would pull down any Docker images from the public internet. You can also use private image registries, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We're going to take a look at tagging those container images as well as deployment and how tagging can impact deployment. And we'll round it out with a little peek into testing and environment isolation. While there are a lot of things on this slide, it's important to remember that your end-to-end pipeline for building and publishing any container, any Kubernetes deployment, any Kubernetes pod to one or more environments is going to contain a few different stages. First, what you're going to want to do is start with the Docker file and the code that you want to containerize. You can use single or multi-stage builds depending on the needs of your application. For example, you may want to use a single stage build if you're simply copying files into a container image and then telling that container image to execute a specific command based on the files that you just copied. Multi-stage builds come in handy when you need to compile source code in an intermediary container and then take the binaries from that intermediary container and copy them into your final result. This will ensure that the image that you create will be as small as possible, which is ideal when trying to deploy to one or more targets. You can run unit testing within your continuous integration pipeline for your containers. Typically speaking, you will have a CI pipeline for just your code. You may not necessarily want to do the Docker build there, or you may. It's entirely up to you. Once you go through all of the steps in your build, you can tag that image and publish it to a registry. You can use a self-hosted Docker registry, which is simply just a Docker container hosted somewhere within your network or within an isolated network. You can also use platform as a service offerings such as Azure Container Registry. Now your CD or continuous delivery pipeline will feed from the registry and push that container image along with any execution options through the pipeline to one or more environments. Those environments can be individual clusters. They could be namespaces within the same cluster. They could even be your local environment. One thing to note here is that if you're going to use Azure Container Registry, it hosts container images as well as Helm charts. So you get kind of two for the price of one there if you're looking to use Helm as your primary deployment mechanism. We talked a little bit about image registries. Obviously, there's the public registry, which is Docker. You can use private managed services, which are maintained by a provider, such as a platform service like Azure Container Registry. Or you can also use a private hosted service, which you maintain. This means that any of the maintenance and upkeep associated with that service are 100% on you. When it comes to tagging and deployment, image tagging can be used as a standard. If you're familiar at all with pulling images from Docker, you'll know that in many cases there's an image that has the latest tag, and that denotes the latest stable build of a specific container image. You can also tag images with versions. You can tag images with environment names as well. And if you would like to use tags to dictate your deployments, specifically pushing to one or more environments, using tags to do that is fairly simple. It's also important to note that there's a distinction between continuous delivery and continuous deployment. Continuous delivery implies that the use of mechanisms such as feature flags are in play, which allows you to constantly deliver code without the fear of unfinished features being exposed. Continuous deployment, on the other hand, is automated deployment once all of the features have been signed off on and your service or services are ready to go. So we touched a little bit on unit tests earlier. Testing within your CI pipeline can occur with unit tests. Testing within your CD pipeline can occur in the form of functional, integration, load, stress, or chaos tests. Later on in this section, we'll take a look at some of these, including chaos testing. As far as environment isolation goes, obviously you have your local development environment. You might have a dedicated cluster for an environment, such as dev, QA, or prod, or you may be using a model that is multi-tenant, wherein a large cluster is split up amongst different teams, or perhaps dedicated to several environments for one team. This goes along the lines of a non-production versus production cluster, where non-production would have dev, QA, perhaps a UAT environment sectioned off by namespace, and your production cluster would be a dedicated cluster. Each has its benefits and drawbacks, so it's important to make sure that you establish a plan and design accordingly around that plan